everyone. Thank you for coming to this Women's History Month event in the Iowa Women's Archives. And before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to just thank the various people who have sponsored this event, including the University of Iowa's Chief Diversity Office, the History Department, the Law School, and the University of Iowa Libraries. And I'd also like to thank Linda Kerber for making it all happen. for the inspiring us to do this, right, Len? And I'm Karen Mason. I'm the curator of the archives, and the other people I need to thank are my co-conspirator, Janet Weaver, who's the assistant curator of the Iowa Women's Archives, and our two wonderful students, Billy Cotterman and Kayla Pollack, who may have already fled to class. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Marlene Booth. Marlene was born and raised in Iowa, and I first learned of her about the time that her film Yiddle in the Middle came out, and someone brought that to my attention, and I watched that wonderful film, and I hope that many of you will have a chance to see it tomorrow night at Hillel House. But Marlene's films are very wide-ranging. She has done films on Brown versus the Board of Education. She's done an incredible film that I had the chance to watch the other day about the Forward, the Yiddish language newspaper that was started in 1897 in New York City and has still survives. And there are some interesting parallels between that and her most recent work on Pidgin, the language spoken in Hawaii, one of the many languages spoken in Hawaii. And she's also done a film on called The Double Burden, on the dual roles of working mothers in three communities. Her films really resonate with me for many reasons. One, that they're deeply rooted in history, but they're also very personal. And they make connections between historical events and contemporary society. They always tell a story, and as many of you have done work in the archives, and you know that the archives is filled with stories, so that resonates with me too. And women are central to every story in some way. And if you have watched any of her films, you'll not be surprised to learn that Marlene Booth has received many prestigious awards, way too numerous to list, but they include an Emmy nomination, the Audience Award for Best Documentary at the Hawaii International Film Festival, and the Grand Jury Prize at the Honolulu Film Awards. Marlene's talk today is entitled Tell Me a Story, Making and Learning from Documentary Films. Marlene?
Well, thank you very much for that, Karen. What a wonderful introduction. I want to just sit back and sort of take that in and bask, but I'll talk. And I want to thank also Karen and Janet and Linda and Len and all the people you mentioned who brought me here and who invited me to come. There are, I guess, many identities that I can claim, but the one of being an Iowan is one of which I'm very proud, and it feels very deep inside me. I think I am an Iowan through and through in more ways than one can imagine. I'm sure my husband, Avi Soifer, would attest to that in ways both good and bad. And my cousin Beverly also, who partly grew up in Iowa. But it really is, it's wonderful to be back. I'm from Des Moines and not Iowa City, but in many ways back where it all began, and to begin to think about what my work has been and the ways in which it's connected to Iowa. So I do want to speak. Linda sort of got me going, saying, well, talk about being a woman and a feminist, and these are different things, and an Iowan. And I do want to talk about all those things, and I want to talk about many of them within the context of describing how I work. And I invite you at any time, please, to feel free to interrupt me. I won't feel as though you're being rude. I am also a college teacher, so I know what it's like to be interrupted. So really go right ahead and do that. And if there's anything you'd like me to address that I'm not, just jump right in. I want to talk about the making of the film one of the films that Karen referred to, Yiddle in the Middle, Growing Up Jewish in Iowa, which is a very personal film. It's my own story. It was a story I hadn't entirely intended to tell because I'd wanted to look at Iowa and Jewish life within Iowa, but I ended up telling stories about my family and my own experiences here and my own observations, and those seemed to be stories that resonated more with other people rather than talking about, the geography of Iowa and how Iowa got settled and those kinds of things, all of which were very interesting to me. And I know that Linda's class about historical research is here. So I just want you to know, I did a lot of research for the film that ends up getting condensed and filtered through me. So there's much more that could have been here, and with more time to do the film, maybe the film would have taken on a slightly different cast. But it ended up being the personal story that was what filmmakers call the narrative train that seems to drive it through and on which the larger points of history seem to hang. I got the idea for making the film. I think it came, there really aren't, for me, eureka moments of saying, that's what I'll do a film about. Or if there are, they haven't come yet. So I invite them whenever they might appear. And in fact, I invite films wholly finished. That would be nice too, but that also hasn't come. But the film that I worked on just before Yiddle in the Middle, which is called The Double Burden, 3 Generations of Working Mothers, had in it a section that was autobiographical. I happened to be the daughter of a Des Moines fireman who, in his spare moments, was a wonderful amateur filmmaker, actually. I didn't realize that until after I became a filmmaker, but as I went through home movies, which are another source of research, of course, which we'd always watched as kids. We had always said to my parents of different nights, can we watch the home movies tonight? But I'd never looked at them as archival material for possible use. And I used a piece of them in my film, The Double Burden, to talk about my family and to talk about what led me to making that film. And I liked working with those home movies. They're very well done, first of all. And they brought back, of course, all sorts of memories that I don't know, in fact, do I really remember those things, or do I remember seeing the movies? I don't know, but it was so interesting for me to look at my family's history as recorded by my father, so through his lens, I think often to give him something to do at family gatherings, whether it was his own family or whether it was my mother's family. It gave him a role as the observer to be there, the one with the camera. And those of you who grew up in the 50s remember those cameras with the huge lights. So there's a ton of footage of relatives. They were all silent, of course. These were not movies with sound, of the relatives going like that. None of which I used, but now that I think about it, I could use those in a film too, about changing technologies. But it's my father's view of what was going on at those family gatherings, and then I get to be another filter of my father's lens, and of course at different ages. I saw those at different times and thought different things about them. When I finally got around to using them for Yiddle in the Middle, I found that I had to actually drag myself away and stop watching them and just say, okay, make some decisions here about what you're going to use, because I could see that I could, in fact, have spent the next, I could have spent a decade looking at those movies and not have gotten bored in the enterprise. But I want to show you the beginning of The Double Burden, both as a way of introducing myself to you, and, or I should say, I want to show you. I hope it works.
When I was growing up in Des Moines, Iowa, in the 1950s and 1960s, I didn't know many mothers who worked away from home. My own mother stayed home and raised 5 children. My father insisted on that. He worked as a fireman and was proud to support a wife and 5 kids on his salary alone. We were, in many ways, a typical American family. My mom and my brother Stu, my sister Michelle, my dad, my brother Alan, my sister Deanie, and me. When I was little, I wanted to grow up to be a school teacher. I thought my teachers were the smartest people I knew, and I wanted to be smart like them. That suited my parents just fine. They always told the three girls that we should have a useful skill like teaching to fall back on just in case, God forbid, our husbands should die. They wanted us to go to college, get married, and have babies. I was a pretty obedient child. I got married, I finished college, and I became a high school English teacher. But then I left teaching and became a filmmaker. And I liked filmmaking so much that for a while I forgot all about having babies. In my first film, By Themselves, it was as though my friend Barbara were speaking for me.
If I don't do something soon, I'm going to end up, not having had kids. And is that a terrible thing to have missed? And will I be a stunted person because of it? Answer, obviously no. I mean, it would be nice. I, in fact, like children, and if it can all work out somehow, that would be fine. And if it doesn't, I have lots of friends with children, and I can enjoy relating to them. And I don't think I'll feel as if my life has been, as if I've been deprived of a critical aspect of being a human being.
But by my early 30s, I changed my mind about having kids. My first child, Raphael, was born in 1981, and I loved being with him. I kept on making films, but my husband and I were able to make ends meet, with me working part-time. My parents did not seem to mind that I was working and raising a child at the same time, but other people were really outraged. Who's with your baby now? 25 hours of childcare? For an infant? You leave your baby with a stranger? Aren't you scared and worried? The truth was, I was scared and worried, even though I was lucky to find great childcare. I used to take my son to childcare and then run to the library to read books on child rearing. These books made me feel even worse, warning that I might cause my son irreparable harm. Even 3 years later, when I was pregnant with my daughter Amira, I read these words in my morning paper. What used to be called mothering is not being done at all. When toddlers grow to be young adults, we will see delinquency, deviant behavior, and crime.
It's worth noting, so I talk about by my early 30s, I changed my mind about having kids. My two children now have I don't know how it works, it's a Facebook way of contacting each other that only they have access to, that's called By My Early 30s. In any case. So, all right. So that was one, the film Just Before Yiddle in the Middle, and I really enjoyed working with those home movies, and I wanted to use the home movies in another film. At the same time that I was thinking about that, what would be the next film? My son, the one who was a little guy there, was turning 13 and was about to have a bar mitzvah, a Jewish coming-of-age ceremony. And I thought a lot about what that ceremony meant. I'm sure I thought about it more than he thought about it. In terms of our making a public statement as a Jewish family, and of the importance of that event to us as a family. What did it mean that we were willing to go forward publicly and say to the world, this means something to us? So that was in my mind too, as well as thinking about the home movies. And then it was impossible to watch my son's journey going through this bar mitzvah and my thinking about it without thinking about the differences between him as an almost 13-year-old and me as an almost 13-year-old. And what I realized was that when I was almost 13, I certainly didn't feel comfortable about manifesting my Jewish identity in public. It was not as though it was a fact about me that was hidden, far from it, but it was not something that I felt that I could kind of publicly trumpet. For my son, for my daughter, who's 4 years younger, it was like no big deal. Being Jewish was just one of many things. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, you can imagine the range of what kids were who went to junior high school and elementary school with them. So this was just, you know, something he was doing. It had no impact on him. He was very eager to invite all of his school friends, all of them, to his bar mitzvah, something that I would have felt very uncomfortable doing. But thinking about those things, as well as having neighbors in Cambridge who said to me regularly, "You can't have grown up in Iowa because you're Jewish, so make a choice." And I thought, well, who allows them to deny me the identity that's really mine? I am these two things. These two things in our national dialogue seem not to go together, but they do go together for me. So all of this was swirling around, and I decided I was going to make this movie, Yiddle in the Middle, about growing up Jewish in Iowa, of which we will attempt to show.
It was around the time of my son Rafi's bar mitzvah that I began to think about how different my life was from his. I didn't feel free being Jewish in the way that he does. I didn't want to be different. Here I am with my family, Rafi, Amira, and my husband Avi. We live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, famous for its ethnic diversity. We don't stand out as Jews here. We're just part of the mix. This is my mom. She brought us up in 1950s Iowa, where conformity ruled the day and more than 99% of the people were Christian. I find myself between the worlds of my mom and my son. So I'm going back to Iowa to figure out what it means to be a Jew. A yiddle in the middle. This is my 4th birthday in Des Moines. I was a happy little kid, and I love showing off. It was around this time that I first learned to be careful as a Jew. I'd seen Julius and Ethel Rosenberg on TV and wondered if we knew them. My mom said they were Jews who did something very bad to our country. She said we had to be nice so people wouldn't think all Jews were like that. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. When I was in 1st grade, I brought my menorah to school at Hanukkah time to tell my friends about Hanukkah. And I lit the candles and said the blessings and felt really terrific about showing off. And then after school, I ran into one of my friends with her big sister. And my friend said to her sister, pointing at me, "Do you see her? She doesn't believe in Jesus." And both girls went, "Oh!" Being Jewish was not for show and tell.
Films don't come that way, though. Initially, took months and months of editing and lots of research. So how do you get from the germ of an idea, lots of things that interest you, to a finished product? you do a lot of research, and I was fortunate to be able to do research in several places. One, the American Jewish Historical Society was right outside Boston at Brandeis University. We were living in Boston at the time. So I used to take the subway there and go, and they had wonderful archives from the, boy, what was it called? It was the project that Jacob Schiff, a German Jewish financier in New York, had set up to do two things. One was to send representatives to Eastern Europe, into the cities and small towns of Eastern Europe, and to try to persuade people who were thinking of immigrating to the United States to go places other than the eastern seacoast big towns, not to go to New York or Philadelphia or Boston, but in fact to be rerouted to what they called the hinterland. That's us here, through Galveston, Texas. So there were very interesting records about people talking, and pamphlets in Yiddish, although I read the English translations at that point, about this project touting the virtues of the hinterland and work that they would find here. And indeed, of course, Jews who came to the Midwest found many more opportunities than they did in the overcrowded places of the Eastern Seaboard. So that was one source of records that I found. The other were these same folks who found people in these eastern cities who were impoverished, who were living on the streets, who didn't have many prospects in life, and they were saying to them, we need tailors in Iowa, for example. Are you a tailor? And somebody impoverished on the streets would say, yes, I am a tailor, and they would send them out to Iowa or Oklahoma or Kansas or various places. And then there was correspondence of these people writing back. You know, you never think of what the next chapter is going to be. The next chapter was, but my wife isn't here, and my kids aren't here, and I'm lonely, and I can't find kosher meat, and this is no place for me, and you've got to help me, and you promised to bring my wife. And why is she not here? Or my wife is sick, and I haven't made wages yet, and how can I take care of her? Really heartrending, quite remarkable documents, and I got to hold in my hands, which you can when you do research, the exact pages that they were holding. They probably shouldn't have let me hold them in my hands, but they did. You got to see exactly what they were writing and what their appeals were. So that was one place. The other place was I would go back to Des Moines and do research at the Iowa Public Library, where I'd spent tons of time as a high school student, and find city directories in which Beverly was the name of our grandfather from when he had first come to Des Moines in the early 1900s, with his name, his age, the address where he'd lived, and what he was doing. So to feel myself, just by virtue of the research alone, transported back to a time when I was never going to live, I wasn't going to live in 1906, was really quite remarkable, and began to paint for me a picture of the world that had formed this community, which I then was a member of beginning in the late 1940s. So that was one piece of the wonderful research. Of course, the other was looking through these movies extensively, and then the third was meeting people. What was my story? There's always the problem as you work on a film. I'm sure it's that way when you do research in general, of what's the story here, right? If I just show you documents and they're not tied together by any kind of narrative, you'll fall asleep, as well you might. But if they're strung together by some sort of story, then you're engaged. Then there's some way, and even in a documentary, you want to follow the dictates of good narrative storytelling: a beginning, a middle, and an end. A goal that somebody sets, perhaps, that can't be met, so that you have a sense of somebody's journey that you want to follow along. All of these things are things that you look for as you work on a film. You, of course, also need to find crews to work with. So there's the research piece of it, where you're trying to put together a story. You use that research in service to both figuring out what you're going to film, and you use the research because films aren't free, it turns out. Another myth, in case you came in with that idea. So you need to raise money. I don't do most of my own technical work on a film. So I have to hire a camera person, a sound person, and an assistant to help me. It's the smallest crew I can imagine working with. I don't want to barge into people's homes with, you know, crews of 15 that completely take over. You need the money for that. It used to be for film stock. It's now for video. And you need to, again, make a compelling case. Why should I be funded for making a film when somebody else wants to make a film about doctors in Haiti and the crisis in Haiti? Why is mine more worthy? So you have to make yourself a lawyer to make your case about the film. I was thinking about what Linda had asked in terms of being a woman, being a feminist. And I would say that in my own working style, I try never to be the tough-minded Hollywood director who comes in and says, okay, I'm here now, move aside, we're gonna move all your furniture into a different room, and we're gonna set up this apartment the way I want it to look for what I'm doing. I'm gonna stop you when you're in the midst of a take and get a different angle. I don't like doing that. I like making the people that I'm filming feel as though that I'm filming their life, a piece of it, and representing it in a way that they live it. If I were trying to, in fact, impose my will on every frame that goes into my films, why would I make documentaries? So I try to make both of my film crew something of a family, but I also try to pay attention and really look at the people I'm filming. Why are they interesting? What is it about their lives that helps me tell my story? They're helping me. When you think about stories, it's what people have of themselves. They're giving me something very valuable, and they're giving it to me as a freebie. They may be doing it for their own reasons. They want their stories told too. There's a piece of history they were a part of, and they want others to know it. But I need to respect that and show it as close as possible to how they live in order to fairly represent who they are. Louise Noun is one of two founders of the Iowa Women's Archive, a wonderful woman whom I would never have met, frankly, if I had. That's another value of working on a film. I would never have met her if I hadn't been working on the film, because the social classes we came from were sufficiently different that our worlds would not have come together. The film gave me the opportunity to meet her and question her, and because she played actually a fairly significant role in incidents that affected me, just in terms of setting the tenor for Des Moines and in things that I would be thinking about later. She lived, she was sort of as you can see, maybe, there's a picture here and there's a picture over there on the wall. She was very soft-spoken, just as you can tell, very pared down in many ways, small as I remember, although maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, and almost frail-looking, very direct in the way that she spoke. There was nothing, she didn't try fooling around with you at all, and after after she'd been married and raised a daughter, she got divorced and became an activist in various things, and an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War. She was a civil rights activist, and became a feminist and worked hard to make things better for women, and an author.
I set up my own little club. I was always a little embarrassed that my last name, Booth, didn't let anyone know I was Jewish. As a joke, my cousin Beverly and I pretended to change our last name to Finkelstein. We wrote letters to each other in that name and even produced a Finkelstein family tree. Being Jewish wasn't the only thing on our minds.
I promised Bev she would get her moment in the sun. And the correspondence was really largely on her end. They were fabulous letters and written almost exclusively by her. I guess one of the important things, besides saving things, you shouldn't save everything, but saving correspondence is important to save because you never know when you'll use it. One of the joys about being a documentary filmmaker is that it does allow you, as I guess it is for somebody who is a scholar too, or a writer, to pick a corner of your own world and reflect upon it and make some sense of it. As I said, I wouldn't have gotten to know Louise at all, or heard her story, or known that incident, because I was too young in 1961 to have been paying attention to something like that. But the film allowed me entree to something, I mean, the making of the film, to something I would otherwise have completely ignored. As I think now about the films that I'm interested in making, I'm living now in Hawaii. Sorry for that. Somebody had to. For the past 8 years, and I had made a film that Karen mentioned, Pigeon, the Voice of Hawaii, about language and identity in Hawaii. The man who was my late co-producer on that film, Kanalu Young, was somebody I'm thinking about making a film about. And so as I think about that now, what doors will that open? What experience will that allow me to come to terms with? Kanalu was part Native Hawaiian. It was a very important part to him. Part Chinese and part Caucasian. He was born in the mid-50s, and he grew up at a time when the prevailing sense of being Hawaiian was not a very good one. So if you were of Native Hawaiian ancestry, it was not something that you offered to people as a calling card. He grew up trying to be just about as American as you could possibly be. He loved rock and roll, he loved TV, he loved sports. All of those things were a big part of who he was, and yet he came from this family, a father who was Chinese Caucasian and a mom who was Hawaiian Caucasian, and both sides had very strong influences on him. Unlike us at that age, part of his, where I went to Hebrew school, what he did, he went to Chinese school, though he found it pretty tough. And his mother sent him for hula lessons, Mindu hula in Hawaii as well, and for ukulele, what they call their ukulele lessons. So he grew up with grandparents who had, as he talked about it, a large pot of poi, which is pounded taro, that was in the middle of the table. So as they ate, each person would ladle out poi in a special poi cup to use for dipping their fish in, or in whatever way they wanted to eat the poi. So he had a childhood that would have been recognizable to anybody here who grew up at the same time that he did, and recognizable to anybody in Hawaii, and odd to those of us who did not. And yet he merged those two together as he grew older, and depending upon the era that he was in, one or the other took precedence. When he was 15, he was messing around with friends and went swimming at a place where one wasn't certain about the water level. And his father, who had been a beach boy in Honolulu in the 1930s, had said to him as they were going, "Be careful. The rocks are tricky, and you can't quite tell if a big wave is coming in and if it's deep or if it's shallow." He heard it in one ear and out the other, went to play with his friends, and in a moment of just being silly in the way that all of us were silly once, at least when we were 15, took a dive. I don't know if it was a full dive or a surface dive, and ended up being a quadriplegic in that moment. It went from just one instant. And his life changed from being a kid who had a future in front of him that was going in a particular direction, to a kid who had to suddenly stop and see what it would be. He ended up finishing college on time. He got a master's degree, finishing high school on time, finishing college on time, getting a master's degree, becoming very active in, is it Paralympics, for the handicapped? In Paralympics, he said he was just like Bobby Knight. He had so much anger in him. And his identity was all wrapped up in being a handicapped person until the Hawaiian Renaissance hit. And then it flipped, and he went from being a handicapped person who was a proud native Hawaiian. He was there in the front ranks of all the marches for sovereignty. He was among the first people, the first group of people who studied the Hawaiian language and had the joy for themselves of being on the campus of the University of Hawaii and hearing a language that had been banned since, it hadn't been banned, but it had gone underground since 1896, being spoken out of their mouths as the language of camaraderie between them. And then toward the end of his life, he died when he was 54, was trying to, and he had gotten a PhD and become a professor of Hawaiian studies and a historian of Hawaii. He was trying to look through Hawaii's records to try to figure out a view of Hawaii that wasn't just Hawaii for Hawaiians, although he felt that deeply in his heart in many ways, but a Hawaii that represented both sides of his family. His Chinese family who had come over in, I think, the 1800s, and the Chinese and the Hawaiian family who'd always been there, and as he always was pleased to say, my red-headed grandfather from East Texas who married a brown woman and loved her with his full heart. So in pursuing that film, it opens all kinds of things for me, for people I can talk to, records I can access, and a way, using his life as a way of conveying modern Hawaii in ways that I think most of us don't know about it. Avi and I certainly knew very little about Hawaii when we first moved there. And the 8 years we've been there have been terrifically eye-opening in the most wonderful ways. I'm assuming that the rest of our lives, please let's stay there, will be equally eye-opening, because it's a place where we will always be outsiders, but welcomed, and a place I think we'll never fully understand in the way that there are things about Iowa that I understand, because I'm of this place, I'm of this soil. I'm not of the place where I am now. And yet it allows me a different position. But Iowa, as I say in the film, also made clear for me, as did the making of this film, Yiddle in the Middle, that I'm an outsider. And so I have great comfort in being an outsider wherever I am. And that is probably the perspective that I will use, part of being a woman and a feminist as well, I think, part of the perspective that I will use when I'm doing that other work as well. So I thank you for listening to my tale, and invite questions from you about really anything. We've got time, we've got cookies, so what could be bad? Thank you very much.